The sky was clear that morning. The sun gently shone through the windows of the small chapel, casting long, warm shadows along the aisle. The details of the decor, white flowers carefully arranged in delicate bows on each pew, brought a sense of hope for a new beginning. Megan adjusted her veil, admiring herself in the mirror. The smile on her face revealed the mixture of nervousness and happiness she felt. Emma, her niece, watched from afar. At only 12 years old, her big, curious eyes noticed more than the adults around her could perceive. To her, Megan was more than just an aunt. She was her guide, her caretaker, almost a mother since Emma's parents had died in a tragic accident. The bond between them was deep, forged in pain and strengthened by love. As the final preparations were being made, Emma couldn't shake a strange feeling. Eric, the man her aunt was about to marry, seemed perfect to everyone around. But to her, something didn't feel right. In the last few months, he had entered Megan's life like a whirlwind. Charismatic, attentive, always with the right words on the tip of his tongue. But for Emma, there was a coldness in his eyes that others didn't seem to notice. She never dared to mention her thoughts to Megan. How could she? Her aunt was so happy. And the last thing Emma wanted was to be seen as the jealous girl who couldn't bear to share her aunt's affection with someone else. So, she kept her feelings hidden, struggling against the instinct to protect Megan. As Emma walked down the aisle to deliver the rings, her thoughts continued to swirl around Eric. There was something about the way he looked at her when Megan wasn't around, something that made her stomach churn. She wondered if she was imagining it all or if she truly saw what others couldn't. The wedding was approaching, and Megan seemed increasingly absorbed in the idea of a life alongside Eric. The weeks leading up to the ceremony were filled with laughter and preparations, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling of unease that followed her. She observed every detail, noticing small gestures that seemed insignificant to others, but, to her, were signs of something bigger. Eric was the perfect man when Megan was around, attentive, always ready to help, with a warm smile that charmed everyone around. He spoke softly to Megan, promising a bright future together, and that's how he earned everyone's trust. But when Megan wasn't looking, things changed. Emma started to notice that when they were alone, Eric was different. There were moments when he completely ignored her, treating her as if she were invisible. Other times, he made subtle comments that made Emma feel uncomfortable, almost as if he were testing how far he could go. "Your aunt is so busy with the wedding preparations that she barely has time for you, right?" he would say with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Emma didn't know how to respond, feeling the weight of his words. He was right, Megan was busy, but there was something malicious in the way he spoke, something that put her on edge. One evening, after a long day of planning, Megan was exhausted and went to bed early. Emma and Eric were left alone in the living room, and the silence between them was heavy. He looked at her, his gaze no longer the same as the charming man everyone knew. "You'll get used to it, you know," he said casually, fiddling with the TV remote. "Things change after a while, you'll understand." His voice was light, but the implicit threat in his tone made Emma's heart race. She tried to tell Megan about Eric's behavior, about the discomfort she felt in his presence. But Megan, with her eyes shining with excitement, didn't give much attention. "Oh, Emma, you're being silly. He's just trying to get closer to you. I know it's hard, but you'll learn to like him, I promise." Megan seemed so happy, so in love, that Emma started to doubt herself. Maybe she was exaggerating. Maybe it was just a matter of time before everything fell into place. But deep down, something screamed at her not to ignore her instincts. Every time Eric passed by with that look that no one else seemed to notice, the discomfort inside her grew. She watched in silence, recording every behavior, every word. And the more she observed, the more her doubts grew. Summer was just starting to heat up when Emma stumbled upon the first concrete clue that something was wrong. The air was heavy that afternoon, and the house felt wrapped in an almost suspended atmosphere. Megan had gone out to handle the final details of the wedding, leaving Eric and Emma alone once again. She was in her room, trying to distract herself with a book, when she heard Eric's muffled voice coming from the living room. Curious, Emma silently left her room, following the sound of his voice. When she reached the top of the stairs, she stopped. The living room door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she saw Eric on the phone. His tone was different. This wasn't the charismatic and charming Eric that everyone knew. He was speaking quickly in a low, but clearly agitated voice. Emma moved closer, without making a sound, listening closely to the words. Yes, the plan is almost complete. She doesn't suspect a thing. Yes, of course, after the wedding, it's just a matter of time. The money will be all ours. Emma's heart raced. She held onto the wall to stop herself from stumbling as the weight of Eric's words began to sink in. Money? Plan? She tried to make sense of it, unable to believe it could be true. Was he talking about Megan, the woman who was about to marry him, completely in love and trusting every word he said? Fear gripped Emma. She couldn't just stand there. Discreetly, she returned to her room as quietly as possible, ensuring Eric didn't notice her presence. Once safely back in her own space, she collapsed onto the bed, gasping for air. His words kept echoing in her mind like a distant bell that wouldn't stop ringing. For hours, she lay there, turning over Eric's words in her head, trying to process what she had just heard. He was clearly plotting something, and it seemed Megan was his victim. Emma knew she couldn't ignore her instincts any longer. Her suspicions were now confirmed. But how could she reveal this without solid proof? And more importantly, how could she protect Megan from impending disaster? In the following days, Emma began her own investigation. Discreetly, she searched every corner of the house, looking for any clue that could confirm her suspicions. One afternoon, when Eric left to take care of important matters, she seized the opportunity to check his office. There, she found documents indicating a history of failed relationships with women who had lost large sums of money after involving him in their lives. He had moved through various cities, always leaving behind a trail of chaos and financial ruin. Her stomach churned as she looked at those papers. She had already known the truth, but seeing everything laid out in black and white made the situation feel even more real. Eric was with Megan for all the wrong reasons, and it was now clear that he saw her as just another victim in his long list of scams. As much as Emma wanted to scream the truth, there was a massive obstacle in her way. Megan. She knew her aunt was blinded by love for Eric, and without undeniable proof, it would be hard to convince her. Megan was so invested in the idea of a perfect life that she couldn't see the warning signs around her. To her, everything Emma might say would seem like an exaggeration or worse, an attack of jealousy. Still, Emma knew she couldn't let Megan go through with the wedding. There was too much at stake. Now everything depended on how she would reveal the truth to her aunt and prevent something terrible from happening. The days that followed were tormenting for Emma. Every glance exchanged between Megan and Eric made her writhe inside. Her aunt's blissful smile, the unshakable confidence with which she spoke about the future with Eric, all of it only intensified the anguish Emma felt. She knew the truth, but how could she destroy Megan's dream with mere words? The tension between the two grew. Emma could no longer hide her discomfort, and Megan was starting to notice. "What's going on, Emma? You've been so distant," Megan asked, concerned. Emma desperately wanted to speak, to tell her everything, but the fear of being ignored again choked her. Megan was still blinded by love, and Emma knew she wouldn't be heard. Every time she tried to bring up the subject, Megan seemed to get more defensive. "I understand it's hard for you, but Eric is a good man, Emma. He cares about you too, you know. Maybe you just need to give him a chance." Those words, though spoken with affection, felt like knives piercing the young girl. Megan truly believed that the problem lay with Emma, not Eric. Doubts and insecurities were eating away at Emma. Why wouldn't anyone believe her? Was it her age? The way the adults seemed to brush aside her concerns made her feel powerless. They treated her like a child, incapable of understanding the world around her. But Emma knew she saw things clearly. She knew Eric was dangerous. It was as if her body was in a constant state of alert, always waiting for something terrible to happen at any moment. The nights, once peaceful, were now filled with restless dreams, where she saw Megan in danger, and no one around believed her cries for help. The pressure of carrying this secret alone began to weigh heavily on her shoulders. She was torn between protecting Megan and the fear that if she spoke, it could destroy their relationship. What if Megan chose to side with Eric? What if, in trying to save her, Emma ended up pushing away the only family she had left? These questions haunted her thoughts, leaving her paralyzed with fear. Life around them continued as if nothing was wrong. Megan pressed on with the wedding preparations, and Eric, always smiling and charming, played his role as the perfect fiancé. But Emma saw beyond the facade. She knew time was running out, and soon she would have to make a decision. On a hot summer afternoon, Emma sat in the backyard, looking up at the clear blue sky, feeling the weight of what was to come. She knew that if she wanted to save Megan, she would have to be brave. It didn't matter if no one believed her. It didn't matter if she was underestimated for being young. She knew the truth, and that was enough. As a gentle wind rustled the trees around her, Emma made a silent promise to herself. She would protect Megan, no matter the cost. The big day had finally arrived. The house was an organized chaos, with relatives and friends coming and going, flowers being delivered, and dresses being carefully adjusted. Megan looked radiant, the smile on her face lighting up the room as she prepared for the wedding, believing it to be the beginning of a perfect life. However, Emma watched everything from afar, her heart heavy and a sense of urgency growing with every passing minute. She knew she couldn't delay any longer. With every second, the wedding approached, and with it, the inevitable disaster. Emma looked at Megan, who was sitting at the vanity, adjusting her veil with hopeful eyes. The sight of her aunt, so vulnerable, so blind to the danger right in front of her, broke something inside Emma. There was no more room for doubt. "I need to do this," she thought, feeling a mix of fear and determination. She slowly stood up and walked over to Megan. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was resolute. "Aunt Megan," she began, her voice hesitant but firm. Megan looked at her through the mirror, her eyes still shining with happiness. "What is it, dear? Are you nervous about the wedding?" "Don't worry, it's going to be a wonderful day," Megan said, not noticing the seriousness in Emma's expression. Emma took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions threatening to overflow. "It's not that, Aunt. I need to talk to you. It's about Eric." Megan's smile faltered for a moment, and she turned to face Emma directly. "What about Eric, Emma? You know he adores you." But Emma could no longer be dissuaded. The words began to spill out, disorganized, fast, as if she were trying to rid herself of a burden she had carried for too long. She told Megan about what she had overheard on the phone, about the documents she had found, about Eric's dark past, and his history of destructive relationships. Each word was like a bomb thrown into Megan's perfect world. For a moment, the room was filled with silence. Megan looked at Emma with an expression that mixed disbelief and pain. "Emma, that can't be true. You must be confused. Eric wouldn't do that to me." Emma felt the sting of her aunt's words, but remained firm. "I know it's hard to believe, Aunt, but it's true. He's not who you think he is. He's deceiving you. I heard it with my own ears. He's planning to take your money." The tension in the room was palpable. Megan stood up, walking towards the window as if she needed space to process what she had just heard. Tears began to fill her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You don't know what you're saying, Emma. This is a misunderstanding." Before Emma could respond, the door to the room opened, revealing Eric, already dressed for the ceremony. He looked at the two of them, and upon seeing Megan's expression, his demeanor changed. "Is everything okay here?" he asked in his soft voice, but with a glimmer of distrust in his eyes. Emma froze for a moment, but she knew she couldn't back down now. She took a deep breath, and in a burst of courage mixed with desperation, she stepped forward. "Eric, I know what you're doing," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but filled with conviction. "You're trying to deceive my aunt. I heard you on the phone talking about your plan. I know about your past, about the women you've manipulated." The room plunged into a suffocating silence. Megan looked at Eric, waiting for an explanation, something that would erase the terrible suspicions that were beginning to form in her mind. Eric, however, didn't back down. His usual smile disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculated expression. He looked directly at Emma, his eyes filled with controlled anger. "I don't know where you got these absurd ideas, but this is a serious accusation, Emma." "Megan, you know I would never do anything like that." Megan seemed to waver between doubt and loyalty. She looked at Eric, searching for some sign that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But as the silence stretched on, the seeds of doubt began to grow. "Eric, tell me this isn't true." Eric took a step towards her, his smooth, manipulative tone returning. "Love, this is ridiculous. This girl is just making things up. She's always been jealous of our relationship, you know that." But Emma refused to be silenced. "You're lying," she shouted, her voice finally echoing through the room. "I saw everything, heard everything. You're going to ruin my aunt's life if you keep this up." Time seemed to stop in that moment. Megan stood still between the two, her mind struggling to accept the truth that now seemed inevitable. Eric's eyes, once filled with confidence, now showed a hint of nervousness. He knew his facade was about to crumble. The silence that followed was so heavy it seemed to absorb all the air in the room. Megan stood still, her eyes darting between Eric and Emma, as if she were on the edge of a cliff, unsure of whom to trust. For a moment, time stood still. The room, once warm and familiar, now felt suffocating, as if waiting for an explosion. Eric was the first to break the silence. His face, normally serene and controlled, started to show cracks. He stepped forward, his voice deep, trying to regain control of the situation. "Megan, this is madness. Don't let Emma's ridiculous stories ruin our day." But Megan didn't respond immediately. She stared into Eric's eyes with an intensity he hadn't anticipated. The glimmer of uncertainty began to take hold of her, and slowly, the veil of unwavering trust started to crumble. Her lips trembled, but she still hesitated to fully believe what her niece was saying. "Eric," she began, her voice trembling, "please tell me this is all a big misunderstanding." The hope in her voice was painfully evident. Eric maintained his controlled smile, but Emma noticed the slight trembling in his hands, a sign that he was losing control. "Love," he said in a smooth voice, "you know I love you. These are just stories made up by a girl who doesn't want to see me by your side. She's afraid of losing me to you." It was then that Emma, her heart pounding in her chest, found her voice. "Megan, he's lying. I saw the documents in his office. He's done this to other women before, and he'll do it to you too if you don't stop now." Her voice carried the urgency of someone who knew that time was running out. Megan's eyes widened. "Documents? What documents?" Emma continued, "He has records of other relationships, women who lost everything after marrying him. I know it's hard to believe, but please, and you need to see the truth." Eric, realizing he was about to lose control of the situation, dropped his soft tone. "You're lying," he shouted, his voice now filled with rage. "You're trying to destroy our life, your aunt's life. You've always been a jealous and ungrateful child." Megan recoiled, shocked by Eric's aggressive tone. Something shifted in that moment. The doubt she had been trying to suppress finally solidified in her mind. She looked at Emma, whose face was filled with pure honesty and desperation, and then back at Eric, who was now showing a side of himself she had never seen. His mask was beginning to fall. "Eric," she said, her voice firmer this time, "show me the documents. If there's nothing to hide, then show me." For a brief moment, the room seemed to freeze. The color drained from Eric's face, and his posture, once confident, turned rigid. He knew there was no escape. "I don't have to prove anything to you," Eric said, his voice now colder. "This is ridiculous." But Megan took a step forward, her eyes now burning with a determination Eric hadn't expected. "Show me, Eric, or I'm walking out that door right now." Eric looked around, as if searching for an escape, but there was none. Finally, he snapped. "You think you're going to leave me like this? After everything I've done for you," he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. "I saved you from a miserable life, and this is how you repay me?" Megan stepped back, shocked by Eric's sudden, violent outburst. His eyes, once full of charm, now showed a frightening coldness. He was losing control, and Emma could sense the danger growing. "You never loved me," Megan said, her voice trembling but firm. "This was all just a plan to use me, wasn't it?" Eric didn't respond. Instead, his gaze became darker, as if the entire facade he had maintained for so long was finally crumbling. He took a step towards Megan, but Emma quickly stepped in between them, protecting her aunt. "Stay away from her," Emma shouted, her courage surprising even herself. Eric, furious, advanced, but at that moment, the door to the room burst open. Some of the wedding guests, hearing the shouting, had come in, followed by one of Megan's brothers, who had rushed to see what was happening. The commotion had drawn even more people, and within minutes, the room was filled with shocked witnesses. Eric, realizing he was cornered, tried to regain control, but his anger betrayed him. "You're all fools," he shouted before trying to flee. But before he could leave the house, two of the guests grabbed him. Megan collapsed to her knees, silent tears streaming down her face. The shock and devastation were clear. She finally understood the magnitude of what had almost happened. Emma ran to her, wrapping her arms around her aunt as the guests stood in stunned silence, unable to believe what had just unfolded before their eyes. The afternoon dragged on, and the house, once filled with excitement and anticipation, was now drowned in an uncomfortable silence. The shocked guests began to leave, murmuring as they went, while the chaos slowly dissipated. Eric had been taken away by the two men who had restrained him, and the police, called by one of Megan's relatives, were now escorting him out of the property. Megan remained on the floor, her knees bent, her eyes distant as if her world had collapsed before her. The wedding, the joy she had dreamed of, was now nothing but shattered pieces of a life she had almost built on lies. The white dress she wore seemed out of place in the scene of pain and betrayal. Emma, still holding her aunt, felt Megan's body trembling slightly. Silent tears ran down Megan's face, and Emma knew her aunt was devastated. "Aunt Megan," Emma began softly, hesitantly. She didn't know what to say to comfort her. The weight of being the messenger of the truth felt heavy on her shoulders, yet she knew she had done what was necessary to protect her. Finally, Megan broke the silence. "I was so blind, Emma," she whispered, her voice strained. "I didn't see what was right in front of me. How could I have let this happen?" Emma squeezed her aunt's hand. "You couldn't have known, Aunt. He fooled everyone. I just wanted to protect you." Megan turned to face her niece, her eyes red and swollen from crying. But there was something else in her gaze, gratitude. "And you did? You saved me, Emma?" She touched the young girl's face with a tenderness that seemed to heal part of the emptiness in her heart. I should have listened to you from the beginning, but I was so lost in my own feelings." Emma shook her head, tears now rolling down her own cheeks. "I was scared to tell you. I didn't want you to be sad. I didn't want you to hate me for making you see the truth." Megan pulled Emma closer, embracing her tightly. "Oh, Emma, I could never hate you. You were the only person who really saw me, who cared enough to speak up, even when it was hard." They stayed in that embrace for long minutes, allowing their silent tears to ease the accumulated pain. The bond between aunt and niece, forged in love and mutual care, was now stronger than ever. Megan, once strong for Emma, now needed support, and Emma, despite her youth, showed a maturity and courage beyond her years. After some time, Megan finally pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't said anything. I almost destroyed my life." Her voice wavered slightly, but she continued. "You did the right thing, Emma. Even when I didn't want to listen, you didn't give up. And that's something I'll never forget." Emma felt a mixture of relief and sadness. As much as she knew she had done the right thing, it wasn't easy to see Megan so devastated by the truth. "I just wanted you to be truly happy." Megan nodded, her eyes falling to the floor as if still trying to process everything. "I'll be okay eventually. It will take time, but I'll recover. And it's all thanks to you, Emma. You showed me what true courage is." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the soft breeze rustling the trees outside the house. The storm had passed, but the scars would remain. Even so, Megan and Emma knew they could overcome whatever lay ahead together. Megan stood up slowly, helped by Emma, and together they walked to the window. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, a peaceful scene in contrast to the chaos they had just faced. Megan sighed deeply, as if releasing the last remnants of pain. "I'll be fine," she repeated, more to herself than to Emma. Emma looked at her aunt with a newfound respect. She knew Megan was strong, and despite everything, she would find a way to move forward. But most importantly, Emma also felt different. For the first time, she felt heard. She felt that her voice mattered, and that her actions, though challenging, had changed the course of something much bigger. "We're in this together, Aunt," Emma said softly, holding Megan's hand. "We'll get through this, together." Megan smiled, weak but genuine. "Yes, dear, together." Months had passed since the fateful day of the interrupted wedding, and Megan's emotional wounds were starting to heal. The house, once the scene of a nightmare, had returned to being a place of comfort and peace. The flowers that had once decorated the non-existent wedding had withered, but in their place, Megan and Emma planted new ones, symbolizing the rebirth of their lives. Megan was still dealing with the pain of betrayal. It wasn't easy to accept that someone she had trusted blindly had tried to manipulate her life for selfish reasons. However, something inside her had changed. She was no longer the woman who had gotten lost in the superficial charms of an abusive relationship. Now Megan was more cautious, but also stronger, more confident in her own judgment. Sitting on the porch on a cool morning, Megan looked at the garden where Emma was playing with a dog they had recently adopted. Emma's laughter filled the air, light and carefree, as if all the shadows of the past had finally dissipated. Megan smiled as she watched her niece, admiring how the girl had become her greatest protector and advisor. Emma was young, but her courage and wisdom had saved both of them from an irreparable disaster. "You know," Megan began, calling Emma's attention. The girl looked at her aunt with curiosity. "I still think about that day, about how things could have turned out differently." Emma stopped playing with the dog and approached, sitting beside Megan on the porch. "I think about it sometimes too," she admitted with a soft sigh. "But I think everything happened the way it was supposed to." Megan nodded, reflecting on her niece's words. Yes, you're right. And it's because of your courage that we're here now, free from all of that. I underestimated you, Emma. I didn't listen to you when I should have, and I'm sorry for that every day. Emma smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. I don't blame you, Aunt. I just wanted you to be happy, and if that meant risking you being angry at me, well, I was willing to take that risk. Megan looked at her niece with newfound admiration. How had Emma become so wise in such a short time? It was hard to believe that the young girl, still navigating the uncertainties of adolescence, had been able to see so clearly what the adults around her had failed to notice. Megan realized there was much she could learn from Emma, much about the importance of listening to those who are often underestimated or ignored simply because of their age or position. You taught me something very important, Emma, Megan said softly. You taught me to never underestimate the voice of someone who cares about us. I was so focused on what I wanted that I ignored what I needed to hear. Emma lowered her eyes for a moment, fiddling with the folds of her shirt, clearly embarrassed by the praise. I just wanted to do what was right, she said quietly. But I also learned something. I learned that even when others don't believe us, we have to trust our instincts. It was hard, but I knew I was right. Megan smiled, proud of the strength her niece displayed. That's something that will take you far in life, Emma. Trusting yourself, even when the whole world seems to doubt you. You did what many adults would be afraid to do, and I'll never forget that. The soft wind swayed the leaves on the trees, creating a serene melody that filled the silence between them. It was a comfortable silence, filled with understanding and love. The words spoken in that moment marked the beginning of a new phase in their lives, a phase of mutual trust and respect, where both knew they could count on each other. Megan knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges, but now with Emma by her side, she felt more prepared than ever to face them. What once seemed like an ending had transformed into a new beginning. I want you to know, Megan said, breaking the silence, that you can always count on me, just as I know I can count on you. We're a team, and nothing will change that. Emma smiled, and for the first time since the wedding chaos, she felt a deep sense of relief and peace. She knew that the experience had strengthened them in ways they couldn't fully comprehend yet. The future, though uncertain, no longer seemed so frightening. Yes, Aunt, Emma said, holding Megan's hand firmly. We're a team, and we always will be. Time passed, and Megan and Emma's lives began to take a new direction. The emotional wounds were still present, but like everything in life, they were slowly healing. The house, once filled with painful memories, had now become a home for new beginnings, new hopes, and new dreams. Megan had decided to return to school, something she had always dreamed of, but had set aside amidst relationships and life's challenges. Now more determined than ever, she enrolled in a project management course. Life had given her a second chance, and she was determined to use it to build something solid, something that depended only on her own strength. Emma, on the other hand, was flourishing in her own journey. The courage she had shown when confronting Eric had transformed her in profound ways. She was no longer just the girl people saw as too young to understand things. Now, she knew the value of her voice and the power that her actions could have. At school, Emma was seen with new eyes. The confidence that had once been hidden now shone in every word and every decision she made. One autumn afternoon, Megan and Emma walked to the park they always frequented. Golden leaves fell gently around them, and the cool air brought with it the sense of a new cycle beginning. The changing of the seasons seemed to reflect the very rebirth that the two were experiencing. As they walked through the park, Emma looked at Megan, who seemed more peaceful, more at ease. "Are you happy, Aunt?" Emma asked, with a hint of curiosity in her voice. Megan smiled, looking out at the horizon where the sun was setting in a spectacle of orange and pink hues. "Yes, Emma, I think I am. In a different way than I imagined, but yes, I'm happy." Emma nodded, understanding what her aunt meant. Happiness was no longer the fairy tale Megan once idealized. It was something simpler, more real, born from the acceptance that even with scars, life was still beautiful. It was a quiet happiness, born from the inner strength they had both cultivated. "And you?" Megan asked, turning her gaze to Emma. "How do you feel after everything that's happened?" Emma thought for a moment, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, feeling the cool breeze on her face. "I feel stronger, I think, and more secure in who I am." She paused before continuing. "Before, I was afraid to say what I thought because it always seemed like no one would take me seriously. But now I know my voice matters, and that gives me courage." Megan looked at Emma with pride. "That's all I ever wanted for you, Emma, for you to know how strong you are and how much of a difference you can make." They walked in silence for a while, appreciating the simplicity of the moment. Life would still bring challenges, of course, but the journey they had walked together had prepared them to face those challenges. No matter what came, they knew they were ready because now they understood the true meaning of courage. The sun slowly disappeared over the horizon, and Megan squeezed Emma's hand as they headed back home. The road ahead was long, but the most important thing was that they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that was all they needed to face whatever came next. That night, as they prepared for bed, Emma looked out her bedroom window, gazing at the stars shining in the clear sky. She felt a deep peace in her heart. What had started as a nightmare had turned into a life lesson, one she would carry with her forever. She knew the future would bring new adventures, and perhaps new challenges. But now Emma was ready. No matter how difficult the journey might be, she would always have the certainty that with courage, she could change the course of any story, including her own. And so, with one last look at the stars, Emma closed her eyes, smiling, knowing that the future, though uncertain, was full of possibilities.